Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Lindo. I work with the team that supports webinars at SurveyCTO. It is my utmost pleasure to welcome all of you to our exciting event today, where we're going to be spending time discussing SurveyCTO's innovation approach to AI and other innovations in technology. As you all know, this is a topic that I think has been very much present in many parts of our lives, both professional as well as personal. And today we're excited to bring you some great insights from leaders who I know will have lots of learnings for each one of us, whether you're new to using AI, whether you're new even to the idea of principle-driven innovation, or if you work in AI and maybe this is part of your daily work. I'm confident that there'll be plenty of insights that will be of use to you today. Our event today is going to be a live conversation, and we very much encourage all of you to participate as much as possible. Myself, as well as my colleague Melissa, who is will be hanging out in the back end. You'll be seeing her name in the chat as well as in the Q&A. She'll be assisting us with today's event. But as you can see on the screen, we will be hearing from Chris Robert as well as Lawrence Lee. Before I hand it over to both of our speakers, let me just do a quick introduction. Today, we will be hearing from, as I mentioned, Chris Robert, as well as Lawrence Lee. Dr. Chris Robert is a seasoned technologist and entrepreneur who is dedicated to building for social good. He started his career developing online interactive games and building both software and hardware for online bulletin board systems. His path shifted towards social impact after extensive experience in developing countries. He holds a doctorate from Harvard University with a focus on economics and empirical methods. He also is the founder of Dobility, which is the maker of SurveyCTO. Under his leadership, Dobility has empowered over 2,000 teams in over 165 countries to gather high-quality data for impactful policy and program evaluation. So we're excited to hear from Chris today. And then Lawrence Lee is the current president and CEO of Dobility. He's an experienced investor and startup operator. He's currently focused on scaling the impact of Dobility and allowing the organization to bring affordable, high-quality data collection to a growing set of users and context. Prior to Dobility, he built an experience as an investor in both private and public markets, and he started his career at the Boston Consulting Group after receiving a Bachelor of Science degree in Industrial and Systems Engineering from Georgia Tech. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand over to both Lawrence and Chris. And as I mentioned, there's a poll that I'm going to launch in just a second. I invite all of you to please respond to that. We want to hear from you. Chris, Lawrence, take it away.
Thanks, everyone, for joining today. And thank you, Lindo, for that introduction. I'm very excited to be here with Chris, the founder of SurveyCTO, and now a longtime collaborator, and really share a lot of exciting technology and our thoughts around how we've approached that technology. I'd like to start by setting the roadmap, setting the context for the discussion and starting with really Dobility and SurveyCTO's mission from day one, which we think of as principle-driven innovation. And by that, we really mean both parts of that. Principles in terms of driving social impact and being genuinely valuable to our users and to the world. And innovation meaning understanding and connecting technological advances to bring that powerful functionality to our users with ease of use, high quality, and high security. We as an organization have been excited about AI in various forms, even before the current craze of GenAI and the explosion of functionality that we've all heard a lot about recently, including funding a machine learning for quality control project that we presented at a major conference, and more recently, obviously, in understanding LLMs and how that might impact data collection and survey research. As a reminder, we always view innovation as a long-term investment aimed at benefiting users in the field and ultimately through our users to the world. Our interest in LLMs is not what I sometimes call shiny new object syndrome, which is, I think, fascination with technology for its own sake, eagerness to be involved in new technology in order to be able to say we are doing that. We generally do a lot of work in the background thoughtfully in order to connect our users with the technology that we think is right for them and only in a way that we think will genuinely be beneficial. And we inherit these values in this approach from our founder, Chris, who I will hand it off to discuss our exploration in LLMs and the goal of higher bar.
Cool. Thanks, Lawrence. So yeah, I think this point about kind of the goals we have for innovation is important. I think, my personality in general, I think, is very similar to Lawrence's. I'm pretty anti-fad by nature. And so, when I came to digital data collection in, what was that, 2011, it was already sort of old news. Most of the sector, the development sector, the impact sector, it kind of moved on to really exciting things like drones and blockchain and big data and all these super exciting things. And meanwhile, there were all these opportunities to actually put digital data collection into use for collecting high quality data. And so I think, with AI, we're a bit faster on the draw, and so a little, maybe very beginning of last year, I had sort of started by avoiding ChatGPT and the sort of fad and craze, and was just like, hey, I'm just going to keep my head down, keep doing, work. Once I did finally engage with ChatGPT, I was pretty immediately blown away, and I sort of recognized that this was a technology that was different and might allow us to solve a bunch of problems that we've all been wrestling with for a long time and relatively unsuccessfully. So I, on the one hand, was super excited. On the other hand, I was extremely concerned. And I guess, Lindo, do you mind putting up I have a couple of figures to draw on kind of during our conversation here. And this is a sort of figure that when Lawrence and I started talking early last year about AI and the opportunities for AI, one of the concerns that I had and we shared early on was that these generic AI assistants were sort of superficially very good. But at the end of the day, they were trained on huge bodies of sort of good information, bad information, so take survey research, for example, all kinds of, random information from Reddit and, blog posts and other things, in addition to very high quality information. And everybody using these same generic tools like ChatGPT, I sort of envisioned this dystopian future where everybody's using the same AI tools, and there's this like global convergence in like knowledge work product where like everybody is using the same tools and being driven to like a global median result, which is like nobody's doing great work anymore. Maybe nobody's doing terrible work, which is great. But like I sort of envisioned this generic AI as this like great equalizer, sort of pulling everybody kind of toward a mean level of performance. But in principle, you could think about, and it's been coming true slowly over the last year and a half. You can think about like curated AI systems that focus on higher quality knowledge bases, for example, in survey research. And then you can think about actually training these systems for domain and enterprise specific expertise. So if you're an organization that has a point of view on what good quality work is, ideally, you bring that into the AI tools so that the AI is helping to elevate your work and not sort of drag it down to sort of some global median. So this was sort of the idea behind Higher Bar and the effort to engage with AI relatively early. And, I think we talked about basically having different ways to approach AI. And what we ended up doing is deciding that we would start this new company, Higher Bar AI, and start exploring how to use AI in areas like survey research. And but then we wanted to have a very close working relationship between Higher Bar and Dobility. And so essentially, Dobility became Higher Bar's first investor. Lawrence sits on the Higher Bar board. And so there are deep links between Dobility and Higher Bar. And you'll see this as we talk about sort of SurveyCTO and the roadmap and the ways in which, at Higher Bar, we're trying to basically support that. I think just, briefly, all of you on this webinar probably know better than most of us that impact work, survey research, collecting data that informs work is very, very difficult. And it's very multidisciplinary by nature. It's very complicated. And AI has the potential to sort of fill knowledge and skills gaps in teams in a way that helps those teams achieve a better result at a lower cost. And so, last year we began piloting AI assistants for survey research to learn about what teams need help with, where generic technologies work well, like ChatGPT, where we can, use different levers in order to improve the quality of the AI assistants. And we were very lucky to work with members of the broader sort of SurveyCTO ecosystem. So Innovations for Poverty Action, Laterite, Poverty Action Lab, and others helped us pilot early stage versions of a survey research assistant. And that sort of led to some of the work that we've dug in on and looked to refine over the past year and feed into the sort of SurveyCTO or AI at SurveyCTO roadmap that we'll talk about. I think two recurring themes in that early work were that questionnaire development, review, and testing is ChatGPT and generic tools can help with that, but it can become very tedious. It requires a lot of kind of prompt engineering and very careful use of those tools in order to get to good outcomes. And then when it comes to implementing questionnaires on a platform like SurveyCTO, these generic platforms make a lot of mistakes. And so, we need to basically develop ways to improve that AI systems and sort of take advantage of what's good about those generic platforms, and then also sort of fill gaps. And so that's led to, a lot of the collaboration then that we're talking about today. So I'll sort of pause there and hand back to you, Lawrence.
Thanks, Chris. And I think having been along for this technical exploration, the piloting, working with our users, and really, as Chris talks about, taking the role of trying to think through higher bars, technical innovation in the context of SurveyCTO's users. I've had a chance to see firsthand how deep and iterative the approach Chris has taken has been. And I would contrast that with a lot of what I've seen in the broader ecosystem that's called AI exploration, where at its most superficial, you might see a direct call to ChatGPT and not even any system prompt or the most basic single sentence system prompt. But I've had the privilege of being along for seeing Chris work through a lot of questions about what is the right layer to build at to solve each problem, what are the limits of a given approach, really cleverly anticipating in some cases, learning by piloting and therefore seeing use in the field in others. So I'd love for Chris to share a little bit about the kind of iterative approach and how he's thought about innovating with AI in a way that's not just building a thin layer on top of technology that's changing very rapidly, but really building unique capabilities and layering onto that in a sustainable and innovative way.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, the AI is very, very unusual in terms of technology. I mean, it's I've been involved in technology since I was a kid, and building technology, using new toolkits, using new technologies, and there's just not been anything quite like AI, and it's been quite challenging for all of us to figure out the right way to navigate. And so, Lindo, if you don't mind putting up that jagged frontier slide, there's a guy, I think he's based at Wharton, called Ethan Mollick, who blogs a lot about AI and use of AI in often in academia, but also sort of teaching and learning, but even in areas beyond that. And he has this neat way to think about, he's published some papers that talk about the quote unquote jagged frontier of AI capabilities. So one thing that's very vexing about using AI is that in this figure, he draws a dotted line, and that dotted line is essentially equally difficult tasks from our perspective as humans. If we think about, oh, this is a really complicated thing, this is a really simple thing. The tricky thing about these AI systems is that they excel in some tasks that we would think of as super difficult. It's like, can you pass the bar exam and be qualified as a lawyer like ChatGPT? Like, the answer is yes, it can. Can you add 2 + 2? Like, maybe not. Like many of these systems, they're terrible at math. They're terrible at lots of things. And the thing is, like, it's super difficult to predict where these models are going to perform really well and where they're going to perform really poorly. And it's even worse than that because, this jagged frontier, you can imagine like each new version of whether it's, OpenAI's models or Anthropic's models for, Claude, like each of these foundation models, they have this jagged frontier. And so you have to kind of figure out what they're good at. But then there are all of these levers that we're learning to adjust. So for example, building survey research tools specifically on AI, there's ways that we can bring in curated knowledge. There's ways that we can fine-tune models for applications. There's ways that we can learn to engineer prompts. But the thing is all of those levers that we use to improve an AI system, they improve it in ways that are very unpredictable. So you can almost think about this blue line, this jagged frontier of capabilities. When you're pushing out one part of that frontier, there are very unpredictable effects everywhere else. So like I think of it like this blue line is actually like you're pushing and prodding at it, but it's actually like, some things are getting worse as other things are getting better. And it's very, very difficult overall to predict what the full effects will be on adjustments you make in the system. And so what this means is that fundamentally we have to take a very empirical, iterative, evaluative approach when we're working on these systems. And so, basically there are all of these levers that we have. And basically what we have to be able to do is we have to build a system within a really strong evaluation framework and be really open to, at every stage, okay, I'm going to tweak this thing in this way. And it does what I wanted it to do. It's better at answering question X. It's better at giving me advice, or it's better at this language that I care about. Now I need to go back and reevaluate it against every other language and every other question and task that we might ask it. And so we have to basically build in this kind of very iterative, very empirical, very slow and deliberate way. And, that's been a relatively natural thing for us because that's kind of how Dobility has approached technology. It's not a supernatural way that most other people approach technology. And so that's why you see like a lot of like messiness out there in terms of systems. So yeah, let me sort of pause there.
Yeah, I think that's a really great kind of microcosm of or example of kind of the approach we've taken across the board. And you can start to understand how the introduction of really exciting but maybe somewhat unpredictable new functionality can be difficult. And there's a lot of those difficulties that I'm proud that we've embraced rather than circumventing or trying to paper over. And so I think for our users, really what we want to make sure of is we bring you functionality that works reliably, that works within the context of high quality, high data security. And if that means spending a lot of time iterating, figuring out the right layer to build that, figuring out the right interventions that sacrifice quality in some ways because of this jagged frontier, but in ways that either we don't expect to affect our use cases and our users' use cases, or kind of narrowing the scope of the functionality and feature to kind of get around the limitations. I think I want to reassure you that the conversation Chris just had is only a very small slice of the many, many rounds of iteration and evaluation that we've gone through.
Yeah, and I guess maybe now's a good time to step back. Lindo, if you don't mind putting up that sort of Venn diagram. I love, as any good like academic-minded person, I mean, I just love Venn diagrams, even when they're maybe not strictly appropriate. So one thing that's important to understand is that like the AI space and how we use AI in everyday life and in our work, it's not monolithic. Like, sort of AI is, as I'm sure all of you have seen, AI is sort of, I guess, as the development space might say, is being mainstreamed into all of the software we use and all the different tasks we might perform in our work. And there's kind of a messy, complicated landscape. And so the way that I think about it is, we have these chat bots, which are like highly interactive, like you're kind of directly interacting with an AI model in some sense. You have this idea of AI assistants, which are kind of like they're chat bots and you're interacting with the system, but they're a little bit closer to, they're maybe more customized, they're more focused on a specific domain or a specific kind of task. And then you've got like these co-pilots that are being integrated into products directly. And then you've got like sort of AI capabilities that are a little bit more behind the scenes in a product. And then you have these agents, you have automated workflows, and there's lots of different ways to think about using AI and different ways that you might bring it into work. And they're all centered on using these LLMs, these large language models. And they might all share a certain type of content or training or tools or plugins. But at the end of the day, the way you interact with the AI systems is very different. And I guess I would particularly like to highlight, Lindo, on the next slide, the distinction between an AI assistant on the one hand and a workflow, an automated or semi-automated workflow that uses AI in the background. So this is maybe a little bit more detailed than we need to talk about here, but essentially there's the idea of AI assistants as, again, you going back and forth in an ad hoc way with an AI assistant. And so if you're trying to do a certain job, then essentially, you might have to go back and forth with that AI assistant like many, 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 many times. And maybe you're copying and pasting between that and another tool, and you're sort of constructing a document. Or if you're using an awesome tool like Anthropic's Claude with its new artifacts feature, you're able to sort of like collaborate with the AI on building sort of a thing, writing a document or developing some code. But at the end of the day, you're like going back and forth in an ad hoc way interacting. This is very different from taking a specific workflow. So take something like reviewing a survey before you begin piloting it. That is something that might require dozens or hundreds of steps. Like there are different ways you might review it. Like, how's the phrasing of this? Like if we were going to conduct a cognitive interview of this question, like what about the phrasing might trip people up? What about this translation? Is this translation right for this question? Are the different translations meaningfully different in a way that might affect the data quality? Is there implicit bias in the way I phrase the questions or the response options? There's lots of different lenses you might take. And in a typical questionnaire, right, you've got lots of questions. Some of the surveys people do on SurveyCTO are sort of shockingly long and complex. And so the thing is like using that ad hoc, like back and forth with an AI assistant, like that's just not appropriate for that kind of task. And so you want to think about these AI workflows where what you're able to do is like codify an entire process. And so, for example, we started working first in open source in a survey eval framework that was sort of platform agnostic. And then in a way, as you'll see, being more integrated into SurveyCTO, thinking about how do we actually conduct a rigorous review of a questionnaire using AI, but using AI in a way that goes through in a really rigorous way, maybe even challenges results along the way. So if it flags a phrasing issue, like challenge it and say, are you sure that's the right? Or if it flags a translation issue, like go back and forth and actually like have maybe hundreds or even thousands of interactions with that AI model in order to produce a final output, which is, hey, here are recommendations, here are issues we found in your survey. And so, this is just to give you an idea that there are very different ways to think about using AI. And for the work that we've been doing with SurveyCTO, different kinds of problems, different ways that AI can help SurveyCTO users, they demand very different ways of interacting with AI.
Thanks, Chris. That's very, very comprehensive. I think this framework is a really, really useful one for thinking about the SurveyCTO AI roadmap. And in particular, we gave a lot of thought to how we would present kind of the capabilities of AI, put that in front of users, what problems we could solve, and iterating backward to say, well, if this is the set of problems that we think can be solved, how should we build to address that. And I think where we've landed is a really, really exciting roadmap, both already live in preview and also upcoming. Before we jump into that, I'd love to check the poll results. We have a couple of questions that we've put in front of you, and I think seeing the answers would be pretty interesting. So the first question here is, what's your level of experience with LLM-based tools? And it looks like something approaching 60% of folks are in the, well, nearly half are in the never used or tried, another 12% in the interactive with chatbots for fun, but not regularly. But if we flip that around, I think that means for some 40+% of folks, LLM capabilities are a regular feature of your work, whether that's just chatbots or copilots regularly, or more your workflows have already been deeply altered by LLM-based tools to the folks who are kind of working primarily on LLMs. So I think that's, considering how young the technology is, even a 40% threshold is pretty compelling case that this is a revolutionary technology. So I see that for the SurveyCTO AI Assistant, there's much less experience than with AI overall. So I just encourage any of you who are SurveyCTO users or prospective users, past users, I think our AI assistant is a really great way to learn about SurveyCTO. It can guide you through detailed pieces of functionality. It can give you overviews. It's really been built to be a helpful kind of collaborator, co-pilot, chatbot in that first human to AI workflow that Chris articulated.
Yeah, and one interesting thing. So I guess I'm not sure if you've already put into the chat the URL for the sort of AI at SurveyCTO and where the SurveyCTO assistant is on the website. But some of the interesting things about the assistant are, it's like, well, what information is it drawing from? And for us, it's kind of important that we anchor in the product documentation, the knowledge base, and the support center, in things like that. But also, there are questions about like, well, are you able to cite sources for the recommendations you're giving or the answers you're giving? And that was really important to us because we believe that, AI is imperfect, and everything we're doing is admittedly imperfect with AI. And so it's important that people be able to sort of challenge and check the results of anything they're getting from an AI assistant. But then also, like, SurveyCTO users are a little bit different than normal, like, ChatGPT users in that, like, they have survey forms. And the question is, okay, well, how do you integrate a survey form into a chat, an AI assistant, in such a way that it's able to give more contextualized advice and more useful advice? So, for example, it needs to know what your field names are and what questions are in your survey and what languages are in your survey and all of this information, so that if you upload your form for the current version, which is, I'll let Lawrence talk about the sort of broader strategy of like where pilot and early preview AI tools are versus where they're going to end up. But in the pilot version, you attach your form definition. And then, like, how does that get factored into that AI interaction? Like, that's something that's highly bespoke to SurveyCTO context. And so we're able to do a much, much better job than, say, a generic tool like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or one of those. So yeah, I'll let Lawrence talk a little bit more about like where you can find this stuff and like where it's going.
Yeah, so I think the roadmap is a really interesting conversation here. To Chris's point, we have this bespoke functionality that we think is well suited to not just understanding SurveyCTO, the platform, but understanding our users, your needs, and the work context you do. We've already released the AI assistant as the first way to access that expertise, as a way to kind of chat and just have a conversation. And to Chris's point, have a conversation with more verifiability and hopefully in a held to a higher bar, pun intended. And so, but I think that same functionality can be delivered in other ways. So you'll see in our form tools that are now in preview, you have the ability to upload this form definition, and the LLM is capable of helping with expression coding, really translating from what you're trying to accomplish, and SurveyCTO's scripting language to make sure that you get the functionality you're looking for. And then more broadly, at a higher level, it can look at your questionnaire and it can review questions and give you feedback on bias in your language, potential sources of confusion, even looking at kind of how your question might perform in context of more broadly the goals of your form, your research, et cetera. And all of this is really, again, different windows into this really powerful bespoke functionality we've built. And so we can imagine myriad ways to access this going forward, from different user interface ways where this same expression coding and question review functionality can be built into the form designer and be more part of your native SurveyCTO usage experience. But even other future roadmap items of new functionality that really can leverage the same core model and capabilities that we've built and that I think have a lot of open-ended promise.
Yeah, that's a good point, which I forgot about earlier, which is one of the core strategies we have here is to build up a sort of core AI engine and tool set that can then be leveraged in a variety of ways through the product and to accomplish different purposes. So, and right now, these things are in preview. So they're basically being built alongside or outside of SurveyCTO proper in order to be able to give us experience and let us do that iterative evaluation and really make sure that things are safe, they're accurate, they're at a point where we're comfortable with the quality. But then, so during this phase where they're sort of available separately, like you have to upload your form definition. And so, you say, okay, I'm going to attach my form definition, you give it to it. And then, for example, I'll just give you the expression assistance, which is in one of the form tools. You can go in and say, I want an expression for have they gotten a pap smear in the last year? And that's like an example. I've been using a health survey as an example, so it's on my mind. So have you gotten a pap smear in the last year? Well, if it doesn't have your form definition, it's going to have a hard time. Like, it can give you an expression that might work, but obviously it doesn't know like what the field names are, how it's coded in your survey, and so on. But once you upload your survey and then you say, I want this question to be relevant when you've had a pap smear in the past year, it knows your survey, it knows how it's coded, it has all the choice options, everything. And then it also has all of the documentation on expressions available so that it can code an expression that's proper, both based on SurveyCTO syntax, but also your specific form definition. And so, when we're like over time, as this stuff moves into the product, you won't have to upload your form definition, right? So if you're in the form designer and you say, has had a pap smear in the last year, it's going to know what form you're working on, so you don't have to take that extra step to upload. Same with like reviewing a question for bias or for translations or anything else. You'll be able to just click to do that directly in the form designer as opposed to having to go somewhere separate. And there's lots of other examples of how that can how we're planning to do that. But again, at the moment, we're in this stage where we're taking steps to, first we preview internally, we test internally, then we start opening it up for sort of opt-in, sort of preview public beta type testing. And all through we're evaluating and iterating. And then basically the end state is now it moves into the product so that, basically it's all directly kind of available.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of areas that we've already anticipated being able to use the same core model to deliver value, whether that's getting deeper in the new user experience, guiding you through your first usage of SurveyCTO. We've sort of joked about it as the Microsoft paperclip on steroids sometimes, a tutorial that is very bespoke and genuinely helpful in a way that previous technology just couldn't be. Obviously, a lot of the functionality we're talking about will hopefully impact form design, both in terms of quality and convenience. But you can imagine kind of beyond form design using the same technology to power setting up quality checks. And we're already seeing a wave of kind of leveraging AI for data analysis and exploration, whether that's sort of the SurveyCTO data explorer level of looking for anomalies while the survey is live, looking for high level kind of things to zoom in on, or something that more traditionally today we think of as on the BI side and the visualization side. I think we know that there's a lot of promise for AI in general, but I think specifically the model that we've built and developed to deliver value in these ways as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing I just want to highlight, like, I've mentioned several times that AI is imperfect, and that, this is the nature of this technology. This technology is much more like humans than it is like traditional software or computer hardware. It's not as clearly deterministic. And, I think there's a stat, I don't have it now. I think it's like, you can think of these language models as almost like a compression of all of the training data that they've been given. So it's like you take like huge amounts of like, say all of the internet, all, millions of books, and you ingest this into a system that is compressing that into this like language model, this neural network. And, basically that is always going to be imperfect in lots of ways. And in fact, its imperfections are part and parcel of where it adds value, because it's able to generalize, it's able to combine things in novel ways. So the thing is, like, the core challenge, I think, for us and for anyone who's focused on doing really high quality work is how do we take imperfect humans and get high quality results? Well, how do we get high quality research done from individually flawed researchers, RAs, contributors of various sorts? Like, well, we build processes, we build systems, we basically build processes that are bigger and stronger and more capable than any individual contribution. And that's kind of the way we have to think about AI also, is we have to think about, like, how do we take this imperfect thing and wrap enough process around it and, safety and sort of tooling around it to use it in a responsible way to get to really high quality. And so I think that's sort of the responsibility of vendors like Dobility, who are building tools for people to use in, using these imperfect technologies to help people do hard things. And so, I think this is just a core ongoing challenge. And I think it's a super fascinating, I'm more excited about technology today than I have been since I was like 16 years old. And so I think it's very exciting, but it's also like very, very complicated and challenging.
Yeah. And I think chiming in on that point, obviously I'm proud of the approach we take in terms of delivering that wrapping, not just the functionality, but making sure that we have an evaluation framework and we're delivering a model that has been kind of given enough bespoke context and capabilities to be useful to our users. I'd encourage you guys as users to really explore that with all of your vendors. The jagged frontier and the nature of the current wave of AI especially makes it easy, or at least easier than maybe it has been, to give very breathtakingly impressive demos while having technology that can fail in very significant and unexpected ways. And I'm proud of how we go about trying to mitigate that. We view that as our role as technology vendors, as Chris said. And I think that's something that we are watchful for, and we want the entire ecosystem to be watchful for as this wave of technological change kind of continues to pace.
Yeah, and I know we should probably get to questions from participants, but one other thing I should mention, which I feel like any sort of Dobility webinar should mention, is privacy is a core challenge with these systems. And because we have to be able to learn from interactions, it's important that we be able to observe how a tool is being used in a safe way, in a privacy protecting way, but in a way that allows us to see where things are failing and improve them and evaluate them and sort of, and so I think basically we put a lot of time and energy and sort of sweat into building an evaluation framework that allows us to evaluate while still protecting individual privacy, building, for example, in Microsoft Azure's cloud environment, even when we're using OpenAI, so that we can control the region, the hosting, the privacy protections at the infrastructure level. All of these things are things we haven't mentioned, but are the approach we've always taken with core SurveyCTO, and that translates also into how we think about integrating AI tools.
That's a very important point to make, and I think that's a great point to pause on and open up to questions. I know we want this to be a dialogue.
Fantastic. Thank you both for those insights. A lot of really great points, and we're getting a lot of great questions. Before I hand it over to Melissa to help us with the Q&A, I just want to share some quick information. We dropped some links in the chat to some of the tools that were being discussed today, so please take a look at those. We will be sharing them as well with the recording in a follow-up email. And real quick, if anyone is interested in sort of discussing use of SurveyCTO with all the exciting things we have going on, feel free to reach out to our team at info@surveycto.com. And as always, we highly, highly encourage you to keep up with us. There's a lot of great things happening in SurveyCTO, as you can hear. So follow us on social media if you aren't already, so you can be in the know on some of the exciting things that we're doing. And now, Melissa, I'll let you take it away with the Q&A.
Thank you, Lindo. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them. So first question from Jeremiah on the take home from the jagged frontier slide and Chris's points there. How do you actually go about measuring improvements in model tweaking in your iterations?
It's interesting, and it's funny. I've been working a bit also with Damagi, who is one nice thing about the development space more broadly is that people are pretty collaborative, and we've been doing a lot in the open source space, and we've actually been working with Damagi also has been working on like health chatbots and things, and it's very, very difficult. I think what we do in general is there's a few different approaches we take. One is basically we replay entire conversations with all the change. So we'll make a change, and then we'll basically replay a large body of conversations that are very diverse, that come from real users, maybe they come from our internal testing, whatever. And we basically replay those conversations. And then we have a whole bunch of different ways that we evaluate every step of those conversations in order to, for example, grounding. So one thing we care a lot about is, are the responses grounded in the product documentation, in the resources that we fed it? Because kind of behind the scenes, what we're doing is when somebody asks a question, we go to fetch relevant materials. We give those relevant materials with the question to the AI model, and we ask the AI model to ground its responses in this authoritative material and also cite the proper sources. So all of those are things we can test, and we do test. And interestingly, we have to use AI a lot to help us. So if we replay 1,000 conversations, then we've got, and each of those conversations might have, say, 10 steps. So now we've got 10,000 individual interactions. And we want to grade those interactions on a variety of, okay, like, is it safe? Is it accurate? Is it citing things properly? Is it grounded in the material? And all of those, so in all of those dimensions, we need to evaluate them. And so what we do is we automate a bunch of that. And in fact, we can also automate conversations, so we can have an AI interacting with our AI assistant in order to actually simulate conversations, try to maliciously attack and do things that maybe users aren't doing. So it's takes a lot of work. It's kind of expensive, and it's natural that most people operating in this space just aren't doing any of it because it's a real pain, and the results are disappointing. So we'll make changes that we're convinced improve things, and then we'll run it through the evaluation, and we'll be like really disappointed because it's like, okay, well, we did improve X, Y, and Z, but actually like A, B, and C actually got worse. And so then we have to go back and keep iterating and keep evaluating. So it's kind of painful, it's kind of expensive, but yeah, it's also kind of interesting.
And Jeremiah, I'll piggyback on that because I think the way you worded the question actually embeds a point that I think is really worth making on the take home from the jagged frontiers, right? I think the problem of evaluation, much like the problem of the functionality itself, is plagued by the complexity of the jagged frontier. And this problem gets more complex the bigger the surface area. And so just like narrowing the scope, and this is the case for a bespoke model and building at the level that we've built at, just like a bespoke model can be a lot more effective functionality-wise by having a narrow mandate, we can also have a lot clearer view of evaluation because it has a narrow mandate. Because you don't have one tool that you're evaluating for 2 + 2 and write a sequel to a Shakespeare play and also draft a questionnaire. So really, one of the insights of your question is part of why we've taken the direction we have, which is taking the view that there needs to be a core AI engine here that is really bespoke for survey research or more broadly data collection, understanding forms. This context is unique enough that we benefit from narrowing the scope, not just when building functionality, but when evaluating.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, thank you. Very helpful. And then kind of as a follow-up question, Jeremiah also asked, and I thought this was also interesting, if, qualitatively we can see if the model did what we anticipated it did, and that's one way to measure. But what if someone does not know what they think an output should be? How would you measure improvements in that scenario?
I mean, it's tricky. Basically, yeah, we do all this LLM assisted stuff where we can, but at the end of the day, there's also a lot of qualitative human judgment that goes in. So basically, like at the end of the day, there are a set of us who have to actually go in and look at specific cases and make a judgment call. And the thing is, like, we don't necessarily all agree. So, right, there are many possible answers to a question. And so, yeah, I think it's generally just a very, very tricky case and very qualitative in nature. And so we can formalize some of that and use LLMs to assist us in some of that. But at the end of the day, there's also just looking at it and making judgment calls, which we have to do. And again, just coming back, like, this will never be perfect. What we want it to be is relatively transparent. So, we really want it to cite sources. We really want people to be able to make up their own minds. We want it to reveal when it's less certain about things, which is always a challenge. And yeah, I mean, basically, and we want to be able to get good feedback from users on what is more or less helpful.
Yeah, and I'd say that this question philosophically transcends AI to humans, right? Like if you took the same survey you drafted and took it to 2 different Nobel laureates in development economics, they might have slightly different feedback. If you took it to one Nobel laureate in development economics and one in political science, they might both have very rigorous research in their own portfolio, and they might give you dramatically different feedback. And so I think from our perspective, there's one level of making sure that for verifiable truth, you meet that bar, and that gives you some more confidence in the qualitative side. On the qualitative side, there's a battery of ways we can further collect whether we think this is useful, right? If a user gives a thumbs up or thumbs down on whether they take a piece of input or not, they may not have had an expected piece of input, but once they're given that feedback, they can decide, did I actually change my form this way? And we can look at that at a statistical level, and it takes a qualitative judgment from an individual user and really turns it into an aggregate where we might be able to see patterns. This is, oh, well, in this particular language, or even translating between these 2 particular languages, or asking this type of state of mind question, or whatever the case may be, our recommendations are almost never taken. Let's go dive deeper into why that might be the case. So I think there's kind of a whole set of ranges where there's some judgments that are necessarily qualitative, and measuring improvement was hard for that, whether it was AI or human input. But actually doing it at AI scale introduces the ability to look for patterns and quantify what previously was a purely qualitative judgment. And in that sense, it may be able to drive further improvement as well.
And I guess I just want to point out, speaking about languages, and I've mentioned translations, I guess I just want to be properly, like, have a proper degree of sort of humility and modesty around what our current state of the art is on support for lower resource languages. So this is something that a lot of the big sort of LLM foundation model providers are working on. It's something where, for example, Anthropic might be in a different place than OpenAI, and it's something that is improving relatively rapidly. But we know that the current state of the art is highly imperfect and also very difficult to know. I mean, it's very difficult for us to judge the quality of translations and advice about phrasing in a lower resource language that none of us know. So that's definitely an open area where we have a lot of learning and work and iteration to do over this next year.
Okay, so testing. So this is about testing forms with AI. So we need more and better ways to test forms, of course. So a survey on SurveyCTO Collect is basically like an app. It has scenarios for the user, and every time the developer changes the app, its workflow for the user changes. Well, app developers usually do more than manual testing. They have strong infrastructure for automated testing, which allows them to test thousands of mini scenarios ahead of a real-life launch. But changing a SurveyCTO form, the only way to test it is for people to manually go through the survey scenarios. So SurveyCTO should include the option of creating automated testing using AI. For example, I could describe the sample and ask the AI assistant to come up with one with 100 scenarios that cover the whole sample, male, female, row crops or not, varying number of family members, et cetera, and 2, input the values from those AI-created scenarios to test the form. What do you guys think?
So Allison, maybe I'll start on this. I know that Chris and I are both going to nerd out on this. So for those of you who have been excited for testing, hopefully this will be an interesting conversation. Testing was one of the first use cases we discussed. It's so intuitive that having this chatbot interface and an AI that could answer questions in a persona in a way that's internally consistent could give us a lever to generate test data or to test the actual flows of forms, to hypothetically figure out how changes in the form definition might translate to the data output or the flow itself, et cetera. So this is very much something that's been top of mind for us. And we have explored what I'll characterize as sort of the brute force way to do it, which is to tell a chatbot powered by an LLM, you are a rural farmer and you are answering this question. Now you are not the head of this farmer's household, but instead his 12-year-old child, and you are now answering this question, and so forth and so on, and generate test data. And you can imagine for 1,000 rows of test data, that might be five or 10,000 calls to an LLM, because each question might not quite be one, but at each fork certainly based on different capacity constraints, et cetera. So there's a brute force way to do this. There's also other really clever ways to try to use the broader capabilities of LLMs to do this. One we've discussed being technically creating a test data set where a test flow could be done in Python, and doing it bespoke for something where you want 1,000 rows. That effort trade-off might not be great, but LLMs are pretty good at coding. And so maybe a way around this is to have a much more structured prompt that then leverages an LLM to create a script that could create test data. So we don't have anything that we are announcing on the roadmap yet. I will assure you that this is top of mind for us, and both from an intuition standpoint and because we know this is a pain point for our users. And now I'll finally defer to the person who's done the exploration, and we'll have a lot more technical insight than I do about this.
Well, I'll just introduce a third approach, which is last March, we went to a survey research conference, and there were people talking about cognitive interviewing. And it's a very expensive strategy. It was, I think, the CDC, which was reporting on cognitive interviews they'd done on some health surveys in the US. And it's very expensive to go out and conduct cognitive interviews, but it's super helpful for identifying phrasing problems that affect the quality of data and how people interpret questions they're asked and so on. So the first idea was, hey, let's automate synthetic cognitive interviews. So we'll sort of develop a set of personas, or you can develop your own set of personas, and then you can do these synthetic cognitive interviews, and then we can analyze them and identify issues like we would in the field. But then actually we went in and just tried short-circuiting all of that and saying, hey, say you're going to go to the field and conduct a cognitive interview of this question among this population. What are you likely to find in this cognitive interview? And actually, the results very closely predicted the results they found by doing the cognitive interviews. And so we're like, look, we don't actually need to go through all the trouble. So I'll tell you that yesterday, something went live internally within SurveyCTO for people support tickets, where one of the things we're trying to do is when people send a form definition with a support ticket and say, hey, I'm having a problem, one thing we're doing is trying to use this technology to proactively identify problems in a form definition and iterate and basically post as a comment in our support system, hey, based on the form definition the user uploaded, here are some potential issues. No idea, we're very early in this, but one thing we're trying to learn is how good are we at actually anticipating problems without having to go through all this sort of simulated testing and sort of doing the kind of scripted thing that Lawrence is talking about. So we're definitely thinking about this and doing a lot of work on this. But I think we're kind of at time. I suspect we're willing to go over if other people are, but probably people are dropping off. So I'll stop there.
Thank you both. Yes, I think there's lots happening in the chat. Let's see what else is interesting here. Frederick wanted to know, would you say that an expert SurveyCTO user will benefit from the AI assistant? Isn't prompt engineering going to be harder and longer than directly coding the XLS form, if you can already do it fast and fine?
I mean, I think yes and no. So if you're talking about, I want to develop a questionnaire, and here's a description of what I want, develop the whole questionnaire. Like our AI assistant is not, but that's exactly that kind of workflow versus AI assistant distinction that will benefit from a whole lot of interactions with the AI. Like, hey, here's a goal. How do we take this goal and turn it into a set of questions? How do we find validated tools that we can adapt to this setting for this particular objective, this particular goal? So there are parts of this that we're piloting. For example, in the questionnaire review stuff, one of the lenses we take is, hey, what do they seem to be trying to get at with this set of questions? And is there a validated instrument they might better adapt from, whether it's the DHS or some other validated instrument out there? So there are pieces of this problem that we're piloting.
Yeah, I think the answer to that question also depends on kind of the time frame you look at. Right now, there's a set of functionality we've released. To Chris's first slide, there are some users at a level of expertise where that would exceed a general or task-specific LLM. And for those users, there might be a narrow set of cases where the assistant can save you some time, but you might then go over the assistant's output and want to change the results, et cetera. And if you can think in natural language and write a SurveyCTO expression, which, I've met people who can, there's people within Dobility who can, we have users who can do that, then the expression builder might not save you a lot of time or hassle. So for our near-term pipeline may not immediately benefit you. That said, the conversation we just had about form testing, I think there are a lot of tasks that this functionality unlocks imminently that isn't really viable at human scale, at manual scale, that would help everybody. And I think there's a set of kind of activities there that we believe in the core functionality of. We need to figure out how to deliver it efficiently, et cetera. But broadly, I think there are LLM capabilities that will benefit everyone. The first 2 or 3 you see for our most extreme power users may actually be redundant with their existing skill set. But I think that's more a feature of the features that have been released so far than a feature of the underlying technology.
Yeah, and I think just to emphasize, I've been writing code since I was 6 or 7 years old, and I think of programming the way many people who got started with music or languages early in life. It's very natural for me. I have a pretty healthy view of my own skills in programming. But that said, I almost write no code anymore. I'm a very critical consumer of my AI tools, my AI assistants in coding. So I know when it's good or bad. I know how to give it feedback and say, no, you missed this, do this way instead of that way. But it's still like I have a junior assistant that I'm able to use to very much accelerate my work, even though I'm really good at doing it myself. So I think we're very quickly going to reach that point, if we haven't already, with the AI assistants for SurveyCTO as well.
Great, wonderful. All right, one more question. Final question. This is from Miletus. So he said, you talked about the lenses that you're using and applying on the AI assistant. so that the model can do a better job of evaluating surveys and suggesting improvements and generally providing feedback about it. What if users wanted to impose their own proprietary lenses on the model? For example, some user may want to make their survey language appropriate for very young children in a specific country. Could they do it during the discussion with the model, or is this something that the model should already have built in? If there's a difference between the two approaches, then how would HBAI, in partnership with Dobility, probably respond to such a user need?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the way we started with this survey evaluation framework was building a general framework that was built around this idea of evaluative lenses. So what we do is we ingest a questionnaire. We're like, okay, we need to understand what the questions are, what's a translation of what's a module, a set of related questions. And then when we go through to actually conduct evaluation, we want to be able to take these different lenses like, is this biased? Is this translation right? That we built initially a framework that's extensible that lets you basically build your own evaluative lenses. And I put in the chat the open source toolkit that we started with, which allows you to basically build your own evaluative lenses and integrate those into survey evaluation. How to do that as we embed these tools into SurveyCTO, that's a little trickier. It's easier to do in a open source framework, and if everyone's a Python developer, but definitely that's a really good question. It's something that we've been thinking about.
Yeah, and I just say even maybe simpler, thinking about a simpler use case than developing your own true evaluative lens. That gets to the UI question of how you integrate this functionality. At a point where you upload your form definition and you have an interactive discussion with a chatbot, there's an easy place for you to put in human overlay context at the question or form level. If this lives in the form designer, how do we also give the same opportunity and make this? So I think there's kind of different layers of this that we might want to make available to users, or not might, we do want to make available to users.
Yeah.
That question is a great example of, easier isn't always better. It's not always just pulling X functionality into Y button. We really want to be thoughtful and learn from this first wave of interactions what might be useful to our users to add, and therefore how we might want to incorporate from a UI perspective this functionality into the form design process. So I think your question has a answer for deeply technical people, which is there exists an open source framework. You can build your own evaluative lenses. We may be able to support that, but that will always be a sort of technical activity that lives sort of outside of the core functionality. I think there's a whole separate layer to that, which is today, form definition plus chatbot, actually all the context you want to give can be given within capacity constraints. How do we then make access to that functionality seamless while still allowing the relevant pieces of context to be collected? I think that's one of the many parts of this innovation pipeline that are not purely technical, that involve understanding the users and use cases and problems that we serve deeply.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both. I think we're a bit over time, so that will have been our last question. Thank you everyone for participating and asking really interesting questions that let our presenters expand on some really important concepts even more. Lindo, I'll hand it off to you for final closure.
Thank you very much. Just want to echo that. Thanks to everyone who participated today, and very much to Lawrence and Chris for the great insights. I have both of their emails on the screen if anyone is interested in following up on some of the things we discussed today. And as Melissa mentioned, we will share a follow-up with all the resources that were discussed today in a couple of days. So watch out for those in your email. Otherwise, we hope you'll join us for future events. And again, we appreciate your time today. So everyone have a great rest of your day.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Appreciate
everyone.
you joining.